Hello everyone, this is Brian Hillfrank from SCS Elevator Products. SCS is proud to be co-sponsoring the NAEC All-Member Forums. This is one way in which SCS can help support you, our fellow members, as we navigate this difficult time during this COVID crisis. I also want to give a big shout out to the NAEC leadership team for providing us these all-member forums that are keeping us energized, connected, and informed. Our plant in Red Wing, Minnesota is operating safely and in full capacity. We are here ready to be of service to you. Be safe, be well. See you in Houston.
Morning, NAEC members and virtual Spring Conference attendees. As Executive Director, I welcome you all. I hope you enjoyed the videos by the sponsors of our all-member calls, Columbia Elevator and SCS Elevator Products. We thank them for their support. We would also like to thank Vantage Elevator Solutions for their support of the Spring Conference event. While we were all disappointed that we were not able to hold our Spring Conference in South Carolina this year, we are glad that you are with us today for a portion of the education and events that would have occurred this week, redirected with a twist for the world we currently find ourselves in. I would like to welcome Don Gelastino, NAEC President of Champion Elevator, to share with you some news from the association and then to share with you an important topic on safety in the industry for our mechanics. Once Don finishes, you will then hear from our other speakers, David Clarke, Carol Tullo, Penny Heyes, Dan Penton, Jeff Lawler, Kiki, and Damian Kavanagh. Please enjoy our half day of sessions and thank you for being here. Don, take it away.
Good morning, everyone. I really want to first and foremost thank everyone for attending. We are very glad you're here. Definitely not the environment and style that we thought this was going to go down, but I just want to say thank you very much. God bless you and your family, your companies, and staff. Thank you for being part of our first ever virtual spring conference due to COVID-19. On Sunday, we had our board meeting via Zoom. That was the first too, but it went actually very well. At this time, we elected New Year's slate of NAEC offices. These terms start at the end of the United Convention in Houston. I got some good news to share with you. Michael Frecken will be the president. Hope Evans will be vice president. Renee Hertzberg will be the treasurer. Kevin Flotten is going on round 2 as the secretary. He's doing a great job. Everyone's doing terrific. Our volunteers and their support systems, which we allow them time to serve, are critical to this organization. It's also helpful that we have strong staff and team back in our home office, which they've been doing a killer job, especially through these times. They're all here today on this call, including Jessica Moon, our office manager, Trip Cook, manager of meetings and member services, Amanda Smith, the director of education and finance, Kathy Bell, education manager, Brittany Irwin, registration membership, Jennifer Simmons, marketing manager, and of course, Elisa Smith Arthur, our executive director, who you just heard from. I do want to take this time to thank our board, their spouses, our staff, all committee chairs and committee members. You're a large percentage of the NAEC support system. Many of those committees had planned to meet in wild dooms. as they have been meeting virtually. It's been a success. I've been on a lot of those virtual meetings, and I'm getting my Zoom skills down. Not perfect, but I'm getting there. And so is the staff. So we're all being forced into some technology here, but everyone is plugging away. A few tidbits on the NAEC information. Our United Convention this year will be in Houston, Texas. At this time, we're still planning to meet, barring COVID-19 continuing that far into the future. Fingers are crossed on this one. Rest assured, if it does, we have alternate plans that we'll put in place for the existing trade show, so it can continue. And we have some really amazing technology we're learning about to do a virtual trade show, which will be very good. The nominating process for the next class of board members is underway. The nominating committee will convene in a few weeks to select the candidates as they recommend to new membership. We have more nominations who are willing to serve than we can use each year on the board. The nominating committee have some hard decisions to make. We do thank and appreciate everybody's applications and other people making recommendations, so thank you. We're willing, what do I got? The nominating committee also has the Sturgeon Award nomination requests are out there. This is our most prestigious award. I hope you take the time to look at the criteria and consider someone suitable for this nomination. It's definitely the highest award in our industry, I feel, and it's a great honor to receive this award. So anyone making nominations, you know, really, I can't wait to see who it's going to be, but it's a great, tremendous honor to win that award. On another note, our CET training program continues to grow, and applications for individuals applying to take our CET and CAT certification exams continue to come in. In addition, the VTMP, which is our Vertical Transportation Management Program, continues to see enrollment increase. And I will say, through this environment, and people are working from home, and even a lot of my staff, kudos to everybody doing this and taking the class. And I do think, as owners of independent elevator companies, I highly recommend rolling it out now. We could get you the books, and your people that are home can be educating themselves. I think it's a great opportunity right now to be able to do that. A big thank you again, super big thank you to Vantage and their solutions for their support. You know, I'm from New York, and they're from New York, and you know, I've seen them how to, you know, let a lot of people go home. They got a big staff there, so you know, we just want I just want to let you guys know that our love is with you, and we're feeling your pain right there. Finally, if you have not had time yet to join us in a member forum sponsored by Columbia Elevator, SCS Elevator Products, please listen for the information on the next call, or check out their website pages for the COVID-19 related industry information. This is really good stuff. So, you know, really take a look. And now we will begin. The educational topics to follow are all timely, interesting, and certainly we will take away some great ideas. I got to thank the Education Committee for this great offering. And I just want to really thank everybody for joining us. I know it's a little bit out of character, a little bit different, but we're all in it together, and we at the NAEC and myself are going to do the best we can. And just a big thank you again to our presenters and our sponsors. Thank you. Hey, everyone. We just put up a presentation. I'm holding it here in my hands as well, but my virtual background is not allowing you to see it. This was a compilation and something that early in the game, when we were faced with the COVID-19 and how to deal with it, myself and the RUEC, Delaware Elevator, Ed S, Dave Smart was a big part, Matt Carroll, Lenny Ligotti, a couple other guys from New York. We all had to try to figure out how to keep our people safe. That is the first and foremost, in my opinion, most important thing out there. Safety, then obviously customer service, and then paying my vendors. But I will say one thing. We put together what we felt as a combined group, so we could actually address as many elevator technicians and field people at the same time and not create confusion where one group says one thing, another group says another, one says to wear your mask, one says don't. We want to try to all be on the same page, try to roll out what we feel relates a little bit to our industry. We're not doctors, nurses, professionals in the COVID or anything like that by any means. But again, it was top of mind for us to join together. And what I would like to say is that you took, a merit shop, you took an RUEC shop, you took a consultant, a safety consultant, Ed.S, you took a Lisa, and we all really pounded it out. And even though it's a 2-page document, it was a compilation of a lot of people who cared. And I believe that this here has been up on our website, the NAEC website, since the day we created it. We all gave it our blessing. And it's also, we're going to do a group email after this conference, so everybody could get it on an email. And if you have any questions about it, I'm not really sure we know much more than what's on the paper, but I highly recommend that everybody really digs into this and looks at it. Everyone's probably mostly informed, as we've been talking about the COVID and coronavirus 25 hours a day. But the one thing that is the most main point is behavioral change and mannerisms. Everybody is used to scratching their face and you don't think about it, but now you have to think about it. Washing your hands as a compilation on all of our home fronts, we feel that is by far the most important thing you can do and should do all the time. Pure hand sanitizers are very good, very important, but washing your hands constantly is going to be the help. Gloves, we have our opinion on gloves and masks. Full face shields are what we highly recommend. In all events, I know it looks a little strange. You go to the food store and you're wearing what appears to be a welder's helmet to most people. They don't know what they're looking at. But I got to tell you, the full face shield is the way to go. Masks are good. They're required. We felt as a group they do create you to touch your face even more until you're very adjusted and used to them. But we do recommend the full face shields, especially field workers. It might not look as out of context as if you're sitting at your desk in an office with one on. Might seem a little strange. Strange is the new norm, so you never know. They may have to design a Gucci face shield soon. But safety goggles and glasses are also a big help. And your shoes, I can't stress enough. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. It may sound silly, but when you come into your house, a lot of people walk through the house, and then they have, kids or dogs, animals, pets. The pet could pick it up. It could jump on your lap. Now you got it. You don't realize, even though you washed your hands. So shoes, I bring them home. I spray the bottoms with a disinfectant every day and, leave them out by the door. And clothing is very important. Get it off, get it right into the wash. Soap and water is a big help. and then spray bottles. We also have a real quick fix. Listen, if you can't get everything else, which now, when we wrote this, it was a while ago, but now you can get some more cleaners and disinfectants. But spray bottles with some bleach will kill the virus. You got to look at the Ed.S sheets because bleach is a little bit harmful to your lungs. You don't want to create any lung issues right now with this virus. So, you know, you just have to take things with a grain of salt and be careful. Other than that, I will say I wish everybody a happy, healthy, and safe future. And if you have anything that you think the NAEC could do or we could do to help your business, just by all means, reach out to our office. We are here for you anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We will now take a quick break and be back at 10:30 with presentations beginning with Penny Heyes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Penny Heyes, and I'm the COO of the TrustBridge. And I'm here today with my colleagues David Clarke and Carol Tullo, who are both subject matter experts in the area of cybersecurity and data protection and the regulations around that. The TrustBridge works and trains people in the subjects of data protection and cybersecurity and in all the processes and policies that organisations need and the regulations around that. So we're delighted to have been invited by NAEC today to come and give you some of our thoughts and our ideas. Given the strange situation we all find ourselves in at the moment, with so many people suddenly working from home for the first time, organisations have had very little time to prepare for any of the consequences that may arise from an increased risk of cyber attacks and data breaches. All the data that organisations have is not where it perhaps should be, and it's probably not protected to the same extent that it is normally. So we've brought together a number of specialists in the cyberspace to offer advice and practical help to all organisations who are now in the position of trying to carry on with everybody working from home. Unfortunately, the threat of cyber attacks and data breaches is even greater now than ever before, and we aim to offer advice on how to mitigate that. We're also going to look a bit later on about how we still maintain a professional stance from working from home. So now I'd like to introduce my colleagues David and Carol, who are going to give us their advice on working remotely from home. David.
Hi, Penny. Thanks very much.
Oh.
Is Carol on?
Yes, Carol's here. David, would you like to tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I've got a background in cybersecurity. I used to run security for the largest financial trading network in the world, trading $3.5 trillion a day. And after that, I managed a large security operations center with a global presence, dealing with many of the top 100 FTSE companies. And quite a while ago, yeah, I used to do loads on remote access, and I guess it's taken a while to really take off, so everyone's working at home.
Yeah, that's right. And Carol, tell us a little bit about how you got into the world of data protection.
I think I've always been involved in data and information throughout my career, but with a legal background and a background across the private sector and government, looking at data policy, looking at the protections that you require in all types of information sharing, handling, reuse, licensing. It's been the backbone of my career. So now I take great pleasure in trying to share some handy tips and hints and guidance with our consultations with clients right across the world. And we're going to do a bit of that this afternoon, or this morning, I think.
Great. So I'll bring up the presentation if you would like to start. So Carol and David have really given you a little bit of background on themselves. Throughout this afternoon, or this morning for you, we're going to be looking at remote working, protecting ourselves from home, also working from home with our own devices, which is suddenly something that perhaps we're not used to doing. Then we're going to take a look at communication with our staff while we're working from home, which is really important to make sure that we're all still feeling the team spirit. We're then going to be a bit optimistic and actually look at post-pandemic preparation for what will become the new working norm. And then we're going to end on a really great note, which is how to look professional on screen with our friend in Washington, DC, Kiki. So, David and Carol have both given you a little bit of an introduction on themselves. Perhaps we can actually look at some of the rather scary stats that have come out over the last few weeks. An increase in 660% in the last 10 days in scams, and every second there are 4 new versions of malware. It's been a massive change in the last month, hasn't it?
Perhaps we should just pick up where Donald left us, because he was talking about personal safety and personal safeguards. And I think what we're moving on to complement his very good advice to members is looking at how we have the right safeguards in place for handling what's one of the most important assets, business assets, which is your information. And so I suppose that safeguarding, whether it be for personal safety in these present times, or whether it's safeguarding your assets, is really important. And I think that's picking up what Penny just said, that's the process that we want to really talk about, because data isn't just arid facts and figures. It's actually all the tools that you have to carry out your business. And here, the point that we're making, because of the speed of change with so many people having to work remotely and from home, is, and we've got it there with our 4th bullet point, data is not where it should be. It's where, in this new normal, where we need it to be. And that might mean it's being transferred and transported all around in different places. It's being duplicated, customer lists, client lists, staff details, payment details. None of it is going to be centralized in quite the same way. And I think this is what's caused the weaknesses to allow the bad actors to come in and play around with this information and try and trick us out of that data for their personal gain. But we're very concerned that there are just some simple things and reminders, as most of us are now a good month into this sort of lockdown, that the initial concerns that we saw with our clients was that people were really scrabbling around because they didn't have enough company devices or cell phones or laptops or tablets, and so they were having to let people use their personal devices, and that has continued. But I suppose our main message is that you should look for exactly the same types of security for everybody's personal devices as you would do if they were using kit that is provided by the office or is back at their home base. And it's got to be sensible and proportionate and reasonable. I think that's fair, isn't it, David? Have we lost David? Oh, I was about to come on to some of the
hi, sorry, yeah. Yeah, I think the thing is that the more layers of defense you have, the better it is. Unfortunately, there is no one kind of piece of software that will keep everything safe. So, you know, any virus checker, for example, is better than nothing. You know, the one that you get with the Microsoft operating system, it does very well in the tests. It's often, you know, in the top 10. So, you know, it's not to be underestimated. Whereas maybe a few years ago, you would have said, you know what, I need something else plus that. But there's plenty of free ones that will help in the meantime. They all do a reasonably good job. And there's other interesting software that can help protect against ransomware. Much of it is at least free for 30, 60 days. That can all be used. And there's some that's even free ongoing. So many layers as you can get in, the better. It's a lot easier if you have a corporate IT help desk and they can advise and help you. But in the meantime, it is very easy. I know literally just last night I was having, and it's always interesting looking in your own spam folder. I had numerous emails, more than I've normally seen, of ones which do the blackmail, where they say, hey, we've seen you on your webcam and we're going to use this video and tell all your contacts and show them this video, which is quite interesting. They give you a link where you can pay by Bitcoin to prevent this happening. And what was interesting is the text was almost identical in most of these emails. So there's definitely a formula that's being used out there. I mean, it was a good try. I think that they did pretty well. They did actually, one of them did have a password that I must have used about 6 years ago that I remembered. Now I use a password manager, and I have no idea what my passwords are. They're really complicated, really long, and the password manager deals with all of those. And password managers free, and they're pretty good. Quite often they can coordinate your passwords between your mobile devices and your laptops, which is great. At one time, that was a premium thing. Actually, you had to pay for the software to sync the passwords, because that was always a problem. If you have a very, very complex password and then you try and log on using your mobile phone, it's incredibly painful. But, you know, password managers have got around that.
Of course, that's the thing. There's so many new tools being used now, with all of us now perhaps for the first time using video conferencing tools and our cameras, and it's a window onto our own homes. So clearly we need to be very careful, don't we, about protecting our own personal details.
Oh, absolutely. And as you can see, that I'm in our office. I mean, it's not really, it's a green screen office, but I was on a call earlier today, and a client or potential client I was talking to said, "Hey, you're not social distancing or isolating, you're in your office." So I was kind of flattered with that, because it obviously meant that my green screen looked pretty good. But it's also, you know, people pick up on information surrounding you, which I think is quite interesting, because I've been talking about this a lot, that actually you're inviting, you know, the office customers, business customers into your home, which is not sort of normal. And we've got to adapt to that and how we handle it.
We'll be touching on that a little bit later, won't we, with Kiki? One of the points that I've seen, particularly with lots of other organisations, is the number of information, newsletters and alerts they're putting out, even to small teams who are now working from home and are spread about. Part of the sort of team support is things like getting the best out of Zoom. There are so many really good little practical checklists around, and it's very important. I mean, we're using a Zoom webinar here. It's a very secure, much more controlled environment than the normal Zoom meetings, which is, I assume, why we're using it. But with Zoom meetings, of course, as David's just said, it is a window into your soul, into your home, and there are lots of personal details that you might want not to have visible to other people. And so you need to think a little bit about that. So just in the same way that you need security for protecting your devices, you may now be operating in your home environment where there may be many other adults who are also trying to work from home. You may have issues such as broadband connectivity or telephone connectivity may not be as strong at certain times of the day, and you need to actually think about that, so that it means that you can operate efficiently and effectively, but also think about the data that you're sharing and that you're using, either with others or with those who inadvertently shouldn't have access to it, especially if you're holding data that is confidential. With everything, any form of tool or any form of new use or any bending of the rules or the normal etiquette that you have for meetings or discussions with your teams and your colleagues, it is important to think about the risk and the impact it's having as part of that data. It doesn't have to be formal. We always say, as long as you tell the story, as long as there's an audit that you took what you felt to be reasonable action in the times. So, for example, when suddenly everybody had to lock down and suddenly there wasn't a lot of planning perhaps, and different people were having different problems, just recording those issues, just recording what was done, even if it was an immediate emergency solution to allow David to work from his home outside the city, say, it wouldn't matter, provided you've kept a record of it. I mean, in some data compliance legislation, that would be a record of how you're using and handling and storing that data. And it's just good processing, good housekeeping, just to do that, just as you preserve any other action. You wouldn't just walk outside and leave your laptop sitting outside for anybody to pick up, nor should you do that with any data or any information that you're using. Very important to think about that. And you may not be thinking in terms of formal risk assessments. It might just be part of your normal business continuity. Again, at the start of this session, Donald was talking about some of the information that's being collated, that's being circulated out to members of the organisation, members of the association. The same goes for data handling. Just you cannot remind people enough about what they should be doing, because you don't want to bring onto them some horrible attack and lose the data. And it cannot be not malicious, it can just be carelessness, so that the information is shared and people don't appreciate how important it is to look after it as if it was your own data. So that's the main message that we think we have here.
And Carol, it applies to paper as well, doesn't it? Because
it does.
in an office, it's much better controlled. At home, you know, paper can be anywhere.
It can be, and the rule of thumb really is to always keep things as secure as they can be. In these present times, nobody is going to challenge anything that is proportionate and reasonable. You can't expect to have the same double security for, I don't know, payroll data, but you are expected, if you're handling and keeping paper records that are sensitive and have personal data in them, you should keep them under lock and key. You should make sure people don't have access to them. You should not leave them out so that, you know, children or others in your household, or pets, as we were hearing earlier, could get hold of them. You don't want to damage or lose that very, very important piece of business data. So it's common sense really, but I suppose what we're just saying is try to be a little bit more organized and structured, so that if we're all looking at a desk, you don't have to look at a whole lot of mess. You can look at it in a sort of organized way. And the key points that the takeaway points that we would always pick up are just look at doing something. So if you are doing an alert, and we'll touch on this later, I think, with Dan Penton, but one of the ways of keeping in touch with your team and colleagues who you can't now see and meet up are the ways of using, you know, the informal Zoom meetings for those water cooler moments, or those cups of tea or coffee, and those chats, because people require that sort of confidence of knowing that they're still part of the organisation or the team that they work with normally. So as long as you do something, it's those who just don't recognise that the world has changed in the last few weeks that are the ones who are putting the data at risk. And remember, they're not just putting information at risk, they're putting your organisation, your company, their reputation at risk. Because if people can't trust you to hold on to the information, to operate professionally, you're going to lose their confidence. You lose the confidence of customers, you lose the confidence of staff. So it is about having that professional approach to it. Making sure that the only data that you're holding is the stuff you really need to work on. Deleting duplicate copies, destroying it when you no longer need it. Very, very important. Particularly, as David pointed out, if you're working across multiple devices. And just because information, data, transactions, work is being done in a much more delegated and separated way, fragmented way, your senior team, your senior management, your executive teams still have ultimate responsibility for the handling of the data, so that if there were to be a loss, a breach, or some other reputational damage, the buck stops with them. It really does. And so you want to ensure that there is a regular cascade up of the types of information, the types of issues that are happening with the data, any particular problems that are coming up, the lessons learned from those, what you've changed in your processes to accommodate these very new circumstances for us. And that, of course, means in point 4, this is a great opportunity if you're sitting there and you can't do everything. Donald talked about taking learning and development opportunities like some of the information we're sharing this morning, but take the opportunity just to tidy away those files and look at the data you're holding. And you know, if you're working on a spreadsheet, is it perhaps something you don't need to have so many categories? Do you realise that you've got the previous 5 drafts still sitting somewhere on a device? So it's a good good time just to pause and think about the data that you're handling. And I think we would always say here at the Trustbridge, you must keep a record. It doesn't have to be anything overly formal, but you must be a checklist to show why you took a particular action, what you did if there was something that went wrong, and how you corrected it, and how actually it played into improving processes in your data flow, in your data handling, in your information storage, in your cyber, your security policy, whatever it might be, whether you're big or small. It's about telling that story so that you have got an audit of what you were doing.
David, you were telling us a little bit earlier about some of the top tips, and I think
yeah, and I think there's another kind of tip, maybe, that it's what we do actually internally. When we deal with sensitive issues for our clients, we actually have a policy that in those documents there is no reference to names or the company that's involved with these sensitive issues. And although our systems are secure, we kind of take the thing that what if they did get compromised? And actually, it probably wouldn't be that helpful because you wouldn't know who the code numbers were or who the documents referred to. So if there is a time when you have to use personal data or create personal data on a home machine, you can always use a different name for the data subjects or the company, give them a unique number. So if for any reason it is compromised, the risk is much lower. Secure passwords. We all know, I think everyone kind of has had password training. Probably the easiest way to manage that is using a password manager. They just make things so much easier. I think I last looked at my password manager, I've probably got about 800 passwords in there, and I have no idea what 99.99% of them are. Password protected documents is definitely for some cases. Sometimes there are some free services that you can secure documents so they'll go to the right email, and they're actually free and they're pretty good, and we sometimes use them with different customers. One of the kind of issues with password protected documents, if you're sending a document every week to a customer and you change the password every week, you've got 52 passwords to manage and tie up with that document. So sometimes, although that sounds straightforward, we fully appreciate it can become a management overhead. If you've got Wi-Fi at home, one of the favorite ones is that quite often you can separate. So you can have, especially if it was my son, you'd give him his own Wi-Fi, guest Wi-Fi, so that whatever he does on there won't affect what I'm doing at work potentially. Use a VPN where you can, and there's loads of different VPNs, and some VPNs have different characteristics. Some actually check whether your machine's been updated and you have a virus checker. Some just give you secure access, which is good, but it can also transmit viruses and Trojans. Using multi-factor authentication, I think 90% of most breaches don't have multi-factor authentication. So I think the obvious conclusion is use multi-factor wherever you can.
Can you explain what that means?
That's normally, I'm sure everyone's, when they've logged into their Yahoo, where the app on your mobile says, did you log into here, or it sends you a text. Some of the more sophisticated ones, you have a little token which puts, the banking ones, you have to type in a number and a challenge response number. A lot of those were quite popular in remote access systems about 20 years ago. Then for some reason they lost popularity, but they protect, that level of protection. If that was in place, it would probably stop most of the major breaches. Okay. Cloud security, probably by using the cloud, it does add an extra level of protection, because what we've seen is clients who've got servers in the office now can't get into the office, and their servers are there. You can't really say that they're necessarily going to be managed to the right level. So what we have seen is a huge jump where people are just copying all their data to the cloud. It will probably never go back to those servers. And then, as Carol was saying earlier, as soon as you can, we'll get the appropriate management and privilege controls. And there's some kind of cool software out there that is free. A lot of the stuff on mobiles, mobiles really should have some kind of virus checker. And this is not a recent thing. I remember discussing this with a vendor in 2011, and when you see the stats of how easy it is to compromise any type of mobile device, it's a must really, whether you use the Sophos Interset X or an alternative. There's a lot of good ones out there, and they do protect.
So that's all the protection, but if in the an unfortunate event that we do have some kind of a cyber attack and a data breach, then obviously we need to act. So as Carol just said, obviously a data breach can be accidental, it can be careless, it can be just human error, as well as malevolent. But I think the key thing for us to understand, especially now that we're using our own devices to access corporate data, is what the data types are. And maybe, David, you could go through a little bit of information about the different types of data and the classifications and formats of those.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the areas, and it's probably still fairly weak in many companies anyway, is when data gets on mobile phones, especially if it's your own phone. The upside of that is, and I think what we've seen is actually people look after their mobile phones really, really well compared to laptops. We see a lot more cases of lost laptops and lost USBs rather than lost mobiles. It seems that mobiles are generally kind of welded into people's hands, so the actual physical loss of them is pretty unlikely. It's just whether that data then gets compromised or gets transported somewhere else.
But it's not just loss, is it, with data? It could also be altering it.
Yeah, destroying it, yeah, making it unavailable. In the data protection in Europe, yeah, availability is actually potentially a data breach, because if it's critical to your business, critical to somebody eating, they can't access their credit cards, they can't access their finances, it brings distress and disruption to their life. Yeah, that would be seen as a data breach because the data is unavailable. So yeah, it's not just loss, destruction, or a bad actor.
So also going back to what Carol was saying about making sure that you log whatever happens to the data, one of the things that's critical is understanding who, especially in this day and age, in this period, who has access to that data. So you know who's seen it, who's accessed it.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there's a standard thing that we see from our UK Data Protection Authority. They give this example of a hospital worker looks at the wrong record, and that is potentially classed as a data breach because that hospital worker should not have necessarily had access to that data. Easier said than done, but that's where things need to be going, because not everybody who works in a company should necessarily see every component of every bit of data. And we've seen some big breaches here with a big supermarket. The internal audit guy had access to 100,000 employees, and he effectively sold the data on the dark web. Yeah, he kind of went to prison, etc. on that. But the point was, really, he should have had maybe access to those 100,000 records, but not all at once. His role should have been, yeah, I'm an internal auditor. You can access any 100 in one day whenever you like, not 100,000 in one day. And he was able to download them. So the privilege management, you can see, wasn't quite right for that role. It was just assumed that trusted person should have access to everything. And there's been quite a few cases in banks where a trusted employee has, you know, either deliberately or accidentally deleted all their core and critical data because the access and privileges were just assumed to be right.
So strictly speaking, we should all our organisations should have developed a data breach cyber security policy, but it may well be that certain companies haven't had that up until now. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And generally, from what we see and, you know, our own experience, the quicker a breach is dealt with, the better the outcome. And what we've found is, you know, don't be worried about people escalating every possible incident or whatever, because in reality, most people do understand, and they understand where there's a problem. And quite often you can't define a breach quickly. Sometimes it might be just a feeling that something's not quite right, or there may be some anomaly that somebody's worried about. And generally, and the companies that we work with on a massive scale, you don't get overwhelmed with people calling. The only caveat I would say is you do if you're dealing with physical security, because I know when we've dealt with physical security as well, we had more calls about people losing their umbrellas and coats and hats than we did about cyber breach. So generally it's better to have a heads up on something that's trivial than miss that and actually it's something that's big. So having a really good escalation process, a no blame process. People, sometimes are worried, oh, am I going to look stupid? Did I get the wrong end of the stick? It doesn't matter. It's much better to have a heads up that turns into nothing than a heads up that you don't get for 2 weeks and then it's a major disaster.
But of course, there is an issue there, certainly under the regulations in certain countries, that after a breach has been identified or an incident has been identified, there's a certain period of time that you have to do something about it.
Yeah, and that's really then it's down to having a risk assessment, because it's all about managing risk. And if the risk to the data subject is going to be high, that has to be then mitigated and controlled as soon as possible. So as soon as a potential or suspected breach, it's useful to have a pre-prepared risk analysis, so that can be done quickly, and then a decision can be made whether this is a recordable breach or a notifiable breach. And the sooner that decision is made, it's a lot easier to see what's going on, what you've got to find out. Reality, within 72 hours, which is quite common, well, it is in Europe, you may never know in 72 hours what's going on. You just may have indicators, and then it's a judgment call whether the risk is high enough that it needs to be reported.
Well, tell us
and I think one other thing on the list here is the backup and recovery. Backup and recovery should be probably looked at closely. A lot of people use Dropbox, Box and OneDrive, and depending on how you use them, they may not help you in a ransomware attack, because if a ransomware attack gets on your hard disk, it could duplicate the files, it could change all the dates, and suddenly you've got 100 revisions there that are all nicely backed up on Dropbox. So actually your recovery period may be extended by trying to figure out which ones are ransomed, and it may not even work. Although I have to say, I think Dropbox does have a special feature on some of their options where it can take you back to a known good case. So even backup needs to be reviewed and actually make sure it's fit for purpose, because sometimes you can use these services in a different way, in which case ransomware won't necessarily have a major effect. The government guidance here is that backup should be backed up 3 times, twice potentially online and a 3rd time offline, just to be safe.
Just going back at a stage, you talked about notifiable and reportable breaches. Can you identify the difference for us of those two types of things?
Yes, a reportable breach is generally where the risk is going to be to the detriment of the data subject. If that is potentially the case, I'm making this up as I go along, that all their financial details potentially might be seen in the dark web, and their credit card be used, you could say, well, that could affect the data subject, therefore we should report that to the data protection authorities. If their data, for example, it's potentially stuff that you can find on social media, it's in the public domain, it's already out there anyway, probably you could argue quite easily the risk to the data subject is not that high. That information, maybe, okay, it might be misused, but it was already out there anyway. So they're 2 extremes, and that you would record, because you should record near misses, as that is potentially finable as well if you're not seen to be managing breaches appropriately.
So it really comes down to the type of data, the categories of data really that may affect that.
Yeah, it's categories and potentially use of data, because sometimes data, when you compound 2 or 3 different bits of data, could turn into something else. So obviously you've got special categories of data, which is medical data, being a member of a union, and they're fairly well defined. It's quite often that you may have layers of stuff that build up a different picture. So you may know their location data, you may know where they live, you may know their gender. And if you put those 3 together, and like in Penny's case, we can often track her down to the local bar or pub, and she may not want everybody to know that, and that could potentially affect future business. So you don't know how this data can be used.
Yeah, And of course, another massive area that we really should mention is, of course, it's not just within your organisation. It could also be something that happens down the third-party supply chain.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of these where companies, you know, we've spoken to companies and we say, what do you do with personal data? And they go, well, we don't actually do very much with it. And then on further questioning, we realize they've actually outsourced it all to another company. And that company deals with all their mailing lists, their direct mail letters. And it's quite often, I have to say that we've seen this quite a lot, that it's often, you know, maybe they're not rigorous enough, some of the outsourced companies, in looking after this data. And that often should be checked. And they, you know, we've demanded processes that could be verified, because, you know, the favorite one is you have a mailing list and the address and the name get dislodged by one. So, you know, Dear John goes to, you know, Jane's email address, and it could have the wrong message in it and could cause problems further down the line, depending on what the content is.
Right. So what would be the best way to handle that with a third party? Is that through contractual clauses?
Definitely the first thing would be having the right contracts in place, having procedures where you can audit them, and obviously if there is a problem, make sure the third party company or the supplier company escalates the problem as soon as possible, rather than waits, you know, 71 hours and 59 minutes to tell us. The quicker everybody knows about it, the better the outcome, as usual.
And if you're going to do a sort of review of any data breach internally, you need to be looking at things like the areas of concern and lessons learned, presumably, so that you can then train your staff going forward to ensure that it, you know, potentially doesn't happen again.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the kind of key to any breach, is understand what happened. Yeah, what have you done immediately to mitigate that breach, and what are you going to do in the future to make sure it doesn't happen again, and how are you going to monitor that? And it's generally those three things will be reviewed at lessons learned.
I think the key thing really for me is how we recognise a data breach. How do you know one's happened? As you said, it might just be a feeling. But can you give us some ideas of some of the most common ways that we recognise how a breach has happened?
I think we've seen breaches probably there's generally two ways. One is a CEO finds out from a customer, his client rings up and said, we think there's a breach of our data that you're managing for us. And the other one would potentially be internally, where somebody escalates internally. So, you know, like a recent breach we dealt with, you know, could have got serious. Yeah, you know, we always advise people, you have to deal with these things quickly, because they can get onto social media, and if they're on social media, it may be out of your control then to dictate how the ending happens. And quite often, you know, in a data breach, it may be that a lot of information is misinterpreted and it's nowhere near as serious as it first sounds. So it's getting a handle on it as soon as possible. And as Penny says, sometimes, you know, it is quite often very difficult to confirm whether it really is a data breach. And one of the criteria that we do is we try and get every piece of information we possibly can, and then we do what we call our kind of subjective breach analysis on it, saying, would this have happened in normal business? Could this have been done deliberately, or was this an error? And when you start to rank the pieces of information, quite often you see a trend. You know, this couldn't have been an error. Yeah, this couldn't have been done by accident. This seems to be done by a deliberate intent. And quite often you get quite a few of those line up. You go, well, the subjective evidence is now looking that this is probably malicious, and we don't know quite what's happened, but we know that we have a problem.
One of the pieces of advice that we were talking to one of the cyber insurance companies that we've been dealing with recently was don't ever pay the ransom, which was an interesting piece of advice. So I know Travelex, which was the big foreign exchange company that had a massive ransomware attack fairly recently, and their data was held for ransom. Quite a lot of comment in the press was, on the media was, well, why don't they just pay the 3 million? Surely that's worthwhile doing. But can you talk to us a little bit about why we should never pay the ransom?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally kind of government advice is don't pay the ransom. but quite often there's a lot of other factors involved, and I don't know that it's ever going to be that black or white. Quite often there's a lot of knock-on effects, because if your whole business is dependent on this, the time to get your business back could mean that actually you have no business. So it also then reflects that actually, did you review your business continuity? Did you review your backup and restore? Was it checked? Was it verified by generally an external source? And the chances are it probably wasn't. So then it highlights a load more issues. Is the issue then going to cause detriment to your customers and your data subjects? It's easy to say don't pay the ransom, but you're going to affect 50,000 people if you don't. How do you make that decision? So it's not a position that anybody really wants to be in. And I think it's understandable that some companies, they have to analyze the risk cost benefit analysis, because there is no good outcome either way. There's no good outcome. And quite often, even if you do pay the ransom, you do get your data back, you're still going to be, under the regulator's eye, because that data has been exposed. And, there could be a lot more malicious events coming afterwards. So, yeah, not black or white. And I suppose it's the old phrase, kind of, prevention is better than cure. But I think what it would be thinking is, how much prevention do you do?
But of course, training comes into that too, making sure.
And training does come into it. It is difficult, because if training was the real answer to absolutely everything, I don't think we'd have a problem. I think every company in the world has had cyber training for the last 15 years at least. And I think we've just seen the problem get bigger. So I think it's a combination of training and having a strategic technology, a multi-layered technology, because it's not one thing that will protect us. It's all these layers: training, technology, etc., etc.
Right. Thanks, David. That's been really helpful. I'd like to hand over to Carol now, who's going to take a slightly different tack with Dan, talking about another very important issue whilst we're all working from home, and that's communicating with our staff so that we don't all feel so isolated. So, Carol, over to you.
Well, I'd like to introduce Daniel Penton, who is on this webinar, but has his sound turned off. So I hope, brilliant. Welcome, Dan.
Hi, guys.
Hello. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So Dan is, we've heard a lot about, I suppose, the more corporate side of how we're handling remote working with a focus on data safeguarding. But now's the opportunity, and Dan's going to take us through the very important side of how we all keep in contact with each other, and how do we create this sort of feeling of well-being and belonging to a sort of shared endeavour when we are all split up and spreading all over the different parts of the country. Dan is going to introduce himself, and then I think he's going to take us through some interesting slides. Over to you, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, and good to be here, everyone. And I've really enjoyed the conversation so far, from the start, from Donald's opening through to that presentation right now. So my name's Daniel Penton. I'm co-founder and chief consultant of a company called IC Plan. So we work with organizations around the world and helping them predominantly plan their communications better, but also assisting with those communications. So what I'm going to talk about is communication with your staff whilst working from home. So just bear with me. I'm just going to share my screen and make sure that that all works. 1 second. So I'm on dual monitors right now, which is always a lot of fun, especially when you're doing that. So let's do presenter view there, and okay, and then let me just go back to the Zoom. And then we're going to share screen. And then we're going to share desktop 1.
Great.
Okay, can you see my screen okay?
We can, yeah.
Okay, great. So as mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about something that is on everybody's lips. In fact, you may even be a bit sick of hearing about it by now, and that's working from home, remote working, whatever it's called, we're all doing a lot of it right now. It's not an understatement to say that everyone on this call has seen a massive shift in the last month to 2 months when it comes to how we work and how our colleagues work. I'll just go to the next slide. In Google's 2018 Workplace 2020 report, the organization predicted that every worker would need to be fully technology enabled by the year 2020. And as we close the first quarter, obviously that's now behind us, few of us here on this call today could have truly imagined quite how significant this prophecy would become. So internal communication professionals alongside their counterparts in IT have really had to lead the way in not only maintaining communications over the last few weeks, but also making sure that business continues and the well-oiled cogs of business life continue moving. And the chances are that for many of you on this call, this will have involved technologies like Microsoft Teams or even Zoom, which we're obviously using today. On Teams, you can see how big a shift companies have had over the last few weeks when it comes to how people work. So I think this stat that you're seeing on the screen now is a really good indicator of how Microsoft's core communication and collaboration tool, Microsoft Teams, globally saw a leap from 32 million to 44 million daily active users over just a 1 week period last month. So that's an increase of 32%. And it's not just Microsoft Teams, other video meeting tools have seen a massive increase in users. So for example, Zoom recently reached 200 million daily users in March compared to 10 million at the end of last year. House Party, which some of you may be familiar with, it's essentially a consumer version of Zoom. They've seen a increase in downloads. There are 2 million now in a week. And at the same time last year, that was at 130,000. So everyone is grappling, and technology, the digitalization is playing a massive role in terms of how people are working and how we're coping and really trying to make the best of what is a very, very strange situation. And it really, these sort of stats put into context how many people have literally overnight started to work from home and are not visiting any office locations anymore. And in the US and beyond, if you can work remotely, you are right now. We're not going into the office, you're not going into depots or anything like that. You are literally remote based, and ways of working have shifted massively. And the expectation here is that it's going to continue both in the short and longer term. This is going to really change the ways that we work at many, many levels. So if I go to the next slide, what I'm going to do is cover the challenges this brings from both an internal communication and engagement perspective. So for anybody who's listening that has responsibility or works closely with somebody in internal communication, it would not be an exaggeration to say that this is the most challenging time in recent memory. It is also a time that everyone within organizations is looking at internal communicators to create succinct updates on the crisis, provide strategic counsel to leaders, disseminating huge amounts of data. Plus, like everyone else, they're also having to process the massive step change that COVID-19 has brought to the world and their own situation. So what I've done on this slide is I've listed some of the challenges that going from 0 to 100 miles per hour on remote working has brought. Initially, it was very much the nuts and bolts side of things, i.e. how do I get started when it comes to working remotely? Who do I contact if I need to change my schedule around my home life? Who are the points of contact for support, whether over IT or otherwise? It's also things like the document that Donald presented at the top of this meeting, you know, having that consistent guidelines and things like that. So real sort of hygiene factor communications. I'm guessing the majority of us on the call, we're now on week 5 or 6 of this change. And this means that we should have the fundamental processes nailed in terms of getting online, system set up, and ways of working in the short to medium term. So we've almost done the forming and storming, and now we're quickly moving to the norming business as usual side of things. And that's really the organizations that I work closely with. They're now started to focus their attention on a couple of areas. First, it's how to maintain engagement when everyone in the business is working remotely. On this point, when you think about it, many have gone from regularly interacting in a company environment and all the benefits it brings from being able to have face-to-face updates, side conversations, receiving communication updates in person through things like town halls, stand-up meetings, and just generally feeling more connected. This has disappeared overnight. So now, more than ever, it's really important to ensure colleagues at all levels and in all roles are engaged, specifically company level, team level, and individually within their own work. So how can these remote working challenges be tackled from an internal communication perspective? I've got three thoughts here. Firstly, what this crisis has underlined is the importance of the communication plan, both having a crisis plan to get practical information out quickly, and ideally, a lot of companies had these drafts ready to go. Obviously, we didn't know there'd be something about called COVID-19 that we were having to write about, but hopefully there was some business continuity plans in place. But also having an engagement plan covering how you will actually be reaching and engaging different audiences over the coming weeks, months, and maybe even beyond that, scary and as depressing as that sounds. The next point is channels. So the number of channels in the workplace, it can sometimes feel a little overwhelming. There's everything from employee social networks like Yammer and Workplace from Facebook to tried and true ones like newsletters and email. And the good news on these channels is it makes it easier than ever to reach and engage colleagues effectively. So where internal communicators need to focus right now is utilizing different channels for what they're best at. For example, an update from leadership is much more powerful as a video message than as an email at the current time, because obviously you haven't got that regular daily FaceTime. So it's about fitting the channels to the purpose. And then the final point there is audiences. So there are numerous audience types in a typical organization, and now is not the time to forget or neglect anyone. One of the most important audiences at this time is people in the field. So they're the ones who are having to put into practice what has been decided from headquarters and from above, while also dealing with operational questions and being the face to the customer. So a key piece of advice for everyone listening is to make sure that this audience is receiving white glove communication support and is fully engaged during this time. I said it was twofold in terms of what companies are focusing on now. They've got sort of the setup. The second piece is prepping for the eventual return to work, which is starting to happen as well, even though we don't know exactly when that is going to happen. To be honest with you, we could have a conference in itself on how to communicate this, because there are so many different things to discuss, all the edge cases around returning people to work. But that, again, is something that I encourage, if you're not already doing so, start thinking about how you will, what that looks like, and B, how you will communicate that. Okay, so if we move on to the next slide, I'm going to leave you with 6 tips, ideas, and things to consider when it comes to maintaining engagement against the remote working backdrop. Okay, so number 1 is being reactive. So there's so much information coming out that is almost changing on a daily basis right now. So make sure that you're set up to respond to government, state level announcements, as well as concerns that your workers may have, to ensure that you're providing clarity to colleagues during this time. And what I would encourage with this as well is making sure that you fact check what you're receiving and you've got your sources you've got sort of a list of tried and true sources that you'll refer to, so you're not sort of getting a WhatsApp message through and treating that as gospel. And that can look like 1 or 2 specific people doing that as well, so that you've got a very tight group in terms of the people that will be looking at those communications. So the time is now to make sure you're being very reactive. Make your communications human. So communications like this, where we're on video, high fidelity communication, really helps retain that human touch. So it's very important to make the most of this technology and also start experimenting with it. Obviously, we're doing a sort of town hall broadcast today, but also consider putting in times for water cooler conversations. That could look like a coffee morning where you don't have any sort of set topic that you're going to talk about. It's just for people to drop in, or it could be Friday or Thursday drinks, just to maintain and replace as much as possible what people are missing. And then we've got leadership visibility. So it's really important, if you're in a leadership position or you're working with leaders, make sure that they are visible. Obviously, we've talked about videos and how it's very important to use those at this current time, but also consider mixing it up with different other formats. So it could be, if you've got an enterprise social network like Workplace from Facebook or Yammer, have them go on there once or twice a week and actually input and respond to people, be visible. Similarly, do email updates, send an email, send a note. It's really important that they are communicating to colleagues right now. Also, what I've seen work well with a lot of organizations right now is doing webinars that, again, don't really have a set topic beyond a sort of 10-minute update, but then it goes over to questions, and employees can ask their questions and have them answered there and then. If you can't answer it, just be honest about that and say, I'm not sure of the answer. I will take that down. I'm going to come back to you separately. I'll also share it to the wider group. That sort of thing. It's really important to have those sort of forums in place at this time. When you're on those forums and when you're on calls like this, watch your body language. We're probably doing more. I saw something like 80 billion minutes of Teams broadcasts or Teams meeting times with video calls on a single day not too long ago, Microsoft said, and that shows how much we're actually doing these sort of meetings and appearing on camera. So really making sure that your body language when you're on camera is you're speaking slowly, you're pausing between thoughts to let participants really assimilate what you're saying, and you're also maintaining positive eye contact, whether that's looking at the camera when you're talking or when somebody's speaking, looking at the screen. The fifth one here is troop talks. So again, this is sort of an extension of the water cooler moment. But what I've seen work quite well with organizations right now is having a monthly gathering of 10 or more colleagues where it's covering a specific non-work related theme. So it could be the app you can't live without, your favorite sports moment, that sort of things. Where it just gets people talking about things that they'd probably be talking about if they were in the office or interacting on a sort of normal basis. And how you can work this quite nicely is, rather than it being a free for all and you're reliant on everybody muting and knowing letting each other talk, what you can do is actually do it like a round table. So go around the screen, so to speak, and everybody can sort of say their piece, and then you can go back and forth. So that works quite well. And then the final point before I hand back to Carol is avoid the digital overload. Right now, we're swimming in technology, more so than ever. It's really just the touch paper has been lit on digital technologies. Now, what that can sometimes do is encourage over communication and also make miscommunication happen a lot more in the organization. So as much as possible, switch it up with digital technology. Don't rely on just doing a sort of a face-to-face call. Pick up the phone, speak to people when you're, I don't know, walking around the block or something like that, getting your daily exercise. Just really use different things just so you're not sort of sitting in front of a screen and just managing Zoom calls or Teams calls all the time. So as much as possible, don't let this new norm become the permanent. Experiment, try different things, and try and have fun at the same time.
Thanks, Dan. That was a really good run through. One of the things that I've seen a lot more in the last, I would say in the last 10 days or so, where we're using something like Zoom, where we've got all the little pictures, everybody sitting around the meeting. We've got 50+ people on this call, on this meeting at the moment, so that's more difficult to do. But I think you're right. I think going around and making sure you include everybody in a non-threatening way. So not saying, Dan, what do you want to contribute, but is there anything or anything you want to add? But just to make sure that we're inclusive, because even using the new technology, we're still not going to change people's the way people react. And some people have more confidence and others have less confidence, and this is not helping us, is it, when they're visible the whole time?
No, and there's different technologies. You're still going to have introverts, extroverts, and things like that. And suddenly to be doing web calls, I have noticed a lot more people in the past that I used to do conferences with wouldn't necessarily share their video. It would just be, you'd hear the audio elements, and you can still do that if you want. But what I am seeing is there is a shift where people, it's becoming the new norm to sort of share your screen. Yeah. So it depends on the person. What you also have with a lot of these tools that you're using, whether it's on Microsoft Teams or Slack, is you've got the messaging functionality as well. So that's another way that you can sort of get points. And also what the likes of Microsoft and Zoom are doing is they're constantly bringing new functionality out as well. So Teams, for example, have just got a couple of features, one of which is you've got the raise hand feature. So if before you'd be a bit hesitant about saying, I've got something to say here, you could raise your hand and the person will come to say, oh, Dan's got something to say here. Dan, do you want to go ahead? That sort of thing. So they're doing that. And also you've got in Teams, certainly, you can now choose different backgrounds as well. So if you're a bit uncomfortable about your backdrop, you could change it and stuff like that. So which is good.
Yeah, and I think the last point, that picking up from your top 6 sort of pointers, was that there are lots of organisations who can do the heavy lifting for you. So while you're sort of focused on keeping the business going or keeping your operation running in these difficult times, I know that the data privacy professional organisation that we're all part of, ADPP, we use an organisation called Chronicle just to provide news feeds for us that you can tailor. So in a way, I suppose the last point is use what's available to you, because you can't carry on doing lots and lots of different disparate tasks. You've got to focus on the business, but there are others there to help you, like you, for example. Yes. Yeah,
exactly. And that's what we're working with a lot of organizations with right now, because everyone's in the same boat right now. And you've still got to go back to my earlier point, you've still got to keep the business going. The cogs of business still need to turn. So, there's less resource and time to do it, arguably, right now. So as much as possible, use different resources, whether it's online, there's a lot of stuff out there as well, which is very easy to find, or whether it's speaking to experts like ourselves.
That's a really positive point to end on. Thanks, Dan. So we've covered the softer side, I think, of remote working. So I will hand over back to Penny.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks, Carol. I think that's very important in terms of keeping our team's morale up during this very, very difficult period for all of us. What we'd like to do now is actually be a bit more optimistic in terms of where we're going to be. And I'm anticipating a return to some kind of normal work, probably earlier than some of my colleagues are. Jeff is on the line. Jeff Lawler is on the line today with me, as is David. We've been talking about post-pandemic preparation. So not PPE, but PPP. David and Jeff, what on earth is the new norm going to look like? How do we prepare? and how do we ensure that all our data is back under control? So Jeff, would you like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself? Jeff is one of the partners with the TrustBridge, and he runs a company called TricoStar. Jeff.
Thank you, Penny. Okay, yes, I'm MD of a company called TricoStar. It's been around in the UK for about 30 years now. Sadly, I've been around with it for the same amount of time, but there you go. As I say, getting old is a gift, particularly these days. And we've been specializing mainly in public sector, in legal-based systems. And what makes us a little different is that probably around the turn of the century, we went into the web, and around about 2005, 2006, we started to host legal systems in the cloud for public sector legal departments in the UK. So our exposure to data governance, data security, and these issues, it's been learned through, not bitter experience, but through a long time, a long gestation period in learning what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. Answer the question, how's the world going to look like after this is all over? I suspect a little different, but that's about as far as I'm prepared to commit, because I'm not really sure how different it's going to be. But I think Daniel made the point earlier on, which I thought was really a good point, that blue touch paper has been lit in terms of digital communications. And people are going to, a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people are going to enjoy working in this way. The freedom it gives you, the freedom that I can sit here in a smart business shirt and still be wearing beach shorts on this very hot day is a nice feeling, believe me. So it is going to be considerably different. But I think what's happened over the last few weeks is a massive sea change. And I think the repercussions from that sea change are going to be with companies for quite a while. And perhaps Dave and I can carry on discussing around that.
Yeah. I think one of the things, I know we often talk about this, is that actually over the last few weeks, you've seen a kind of increase in data usage for your cloud systems, which is a result of people having to shift their data to the cloud really, really fast. So I suppose the questions in the PPP scenario is, will it ever revert, or do you think that's there to stay and whatever's happened now will need to carry on and be modified?
Well, a lot of our clients, which is a good example of that perspective, they're moving rapidly, or have been over the last year, to storing documents in SharePoint. A lot of organizations are doing that, but probably the slightly different thing about most law practices or law departments is typically they will have historically, which they need to store 1, 2, 3 million documents minimum.
Wow.
Terabytes of data, and you can imagine the time that takes to get into SharePoint, categorized, linked together.
Yeah,
secure.
It's a massive piece of work.
And we noticed the first week when the lockdown started, a lot of our clients are coming back with a particular web access error that was obviously an indication that even Microsoft, with its money and its massive server farms and its technology, were not coping very well with the amount of data that was being thrown at their servers, maybe in SharePoint or in other areas for data storage. And we were fighting for a week, to keep our clients online for the majority of that week. But I mean, I think probably on average they experienced some 5–10% downtime through all that week, just because of the sheer volume of data. So that data, you said, David, is going up. It ain't coming back down, I don't think.
Yeah.
No.
So I suppose that kind of supports, isn't it, the things that, the change that's happened is pretty much here to stay, because it's up there, it's been proven to work, it's been successful. There is no need, and the cost of reversion is probably going to be greater than the cost that it was to put it out there in the first place. If there's any benefit in that, which it sounds like there probably isn't.
No, I think you're absolutely dead right. But I think the issue that most of IT departments are going to have to face now is, what went up there? How much of it is still up there? What is now residing on people's PCs and laptops, or even mobile devices at home? And is that data secure? And is the content of that data by any chance in contravention of the various privacy laws and GDPR laws, Californian privacy law, that now people have to utilize that data with? So I think that's the big issue. How do you start at this stage? It's like the Irishman, you know, you always ask an Irishman, how do you get from X to Y? And he said, well, I'd never start from here, you know, because this is not the place to start from in this case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose the other kind of complications you sort of said, you know, the data could be hosted potentially in any country in the world. So, you know, knowing even where logically it is one problem, where it is physically is the kind of second issue. But I think those problems are resolvable, aren't they? You know, in theory, there is ways to deal with this and to manage this, even if it is complex.
There are. I mean, it's quite interesting that, again, Daniel made the comment about hopefully some people looked at business disaster recovery. Well, I think the last few weeks have probably shown that a lot of companies certainly haven't. They've never actually considered what happens if our building burns down and therefore we can't get our staff into it for months on end. What happens if electricity goes off? You know, what happens if there's a virus and nobody can get together? I mean, people really haven't done that. I mean, the big companies have, but most organizations have completely ignored it.
To be kind of, I guess, fair to most businesses, everything you said is probably in most people's documented business continuity plan, if they have one. What probably wasn't anticipated that it would all happen at the same time.
That's very true.
You know, normally, you know, tests that we get involved with, we normally kind of test one capability. You know, the building's not available, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've also had the other things that maybe finance isn't available. It really isn't available. And, you know, a shortage of laptops. I mean, who would have kind of thought that 3 months ago, that a common piece of kit is actually suddenly really valuable? You know, prices are going up on eBay. I don't know if you've monitored that, but it's incredible.
Well, it's the same with good quality webcams. You know, you cannot get them from them. People
really,
or even Amazon, they're offering a few, but very, very few. And some of the good ones, good value ones, are basically on a 4 to 6 week wait list from China now to get them. So all that technology is suddenly becomes necessary, and people are getting it. I think to go back to your point there, I think there are solutions to this, and talking about organisations of a certain size rather than just small, you know, very, very small, you know, 1-man, 2-man shops, is that there are tools out there, and part of our business is providing these tools to our customers to identify, well, what data do you have, and what's in that data, and what is anything in that data that you need to make sure is kept private or is not available to people, does comply with the various legislations of the countries in which you live in. And a lot of this software, funnily enough, is out of Israel, unsurprisingly, because of, you know, that is a country that basically lives and breathes on security. But it's very good, very fast, very quick. And applying these tools, you can very quickly identify, you know, where your potential breach points are, where your danger points are, and then you can start to address them. Addressing them will probably take a bit longer, but at least you can find out where your problems are.
You've kind of got the baseline and the gap analysis, and that can be figured out relatively quickly.
And also tools which we mentioned this afternoon are also excellent tools. They're you know, the AIP aspect of a Microsoft Office 365, you know, very, very good when it comes to helping organizations categorize what is necessary, what is needed to be secure. But again, they can take a lot of implementation. They can take a lot of thought. They're not something you can slam in overnight and expect to work. In fact, where it has happened overnight, we've seen organizations grind to a halt because they just haven't thought through what needs to be done. And the last thing is then how do you protect your corporate data from access from, you know, objects which are basically you bring your own PC, you bring your own laptop, you bring your own mobile device. You know, how are you going to protect the data when people are accessing it, you know, from all the various issues that can happen from transmission to receipt in this digital world?
Yeah, and effectively we are, you know, what we're calling is also it's bring your own home, because there is no alternative to work to. I know kind of for myself, I've had 3 power cuts in the last week, And normally that's not a problem because you can go somewhere else, friend's house, you can go to a hotel, you can go to a cafe, restaurant. It doesn't exist anymore.
No.
So where a kind of power cut was never really a big issue, it's now actually I can't do anything unless I can do it on my mobile, potentially.
Yeah, my operations director surprised me at, well, it shouldn't have surprised me really, but about 4 or 5 weeks ago, she said to me, "Oh, hey, have you seen these new micro solar panels you can buy to drive your PC with?" And I thought, no, I'm not sure how you got the electricity and how you get the Wi-Fi. But anyway, you know, the bottom line is that the electric went down, but the Wi-Fi was available. Then you know, it would be something that you know, it's another backup, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it's the more layers as usual that make things kind of smoothly transition.
The more layers you have, the better, to be honest with you. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, did you kind of, what was interesting, you were talking earlier, did you find that, you know, I think it was Microsoft that you said potentially getting overloaded for certain periods. Did they support you and customers pretty well?
I think it was a question of I think there were so many hands at the pump making sure the water levels didn't overcome the boat that their normal excellent communication was not that good. They weren't coming back with why this was happening, and we soon guessed probably the reason why. And it was happening from one data center. We have some of our clients' data in the north of England and in big server farms, and also the south, the different territories of Microsoft have, and it was hitting different territories at different times. So I think that was the and we didn't get a lot of feedback from them, but we soon guessed why, and it became very apparent.
I mean, I suppose one of the traditional things is that, you know, should you be reliant on one supplier for everything? And I think the tendency in recent years is because we're dealing with, you know, just mega companies, the assumption is a mega company is always safe.
Yes.
For availability and reliability.
Yes.
And maybe actually the strategy should be to spread the load across different companies.
Yeah.
Would that even work in these environments?
Would it work in these environments? I think a lot depends on how large you are as an organization. I mean, I can remember, we've been working with cloud hosting for well, nearly 15 years now. We moved into this new environment about 3, 4, 5 years ago, and it was a fairly long and quite a difficult and painful learning curve.
Really,
there was so much to learn how to do it properly that, you know, it was easy to make mistakes. And as a company servicing other clients, I would hate to have had to do that twice over, once with Microsoft and then with Amazon effectively.
That's a good point, actually, because as we've talked about, a lot of companies have really been forced to go through the digital transformation phase in a very short period of time. And I know, David, you and I were talking about looking after your data and where it is now, and how to find it and how to find who's accessed it. We've looked for the last couple of years at many different types of software to help protect in the privacy world, protect your data and find your data. And there are lots out there, and some are better than others. So I suppose the question is, if I am now worried about the fact that my data is all over the place, but I'm not going to bring my employees back into the office because I can see the benefits of them working from home, the lower costs perhaps of them working from home. How on earth do I choose what software to use to try and find that data and try and protect myself? Would it be better to go to somebody who is an expert in that field to manage all of that process for you? A question. Jeff, you were talking about some software in Israel.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very interesting question. I mean, we talk about cyber years now, a bit like dog years and human life years. You know, cyber years about 4 weeks. And
if we're lucky, yeah.
If we're lucky, yes. And there are products, and every new product comes out with better algorithms or better versions of AI. Some of those companies with those products aren't going to make it because they're not going to get the traction or the funding that they need. but there is a lot of change out there, and it's frankly, in my view, impossible for any organization of any size. And I can give you, I won't mention the client, but we had a Zoom meeting with a major public sector organization, a massive public sector organization, starting to look at what sort of products they would use for data governance. I identify what they've got out there. And in this conference, there were suppliers there, about 15, 20 suppliers, and they had 11 members of staff, all who'd formed this committee, which is my favorite English thing to do. They formed this committee, and none of them had a real clue. I mean, it was quite sobering, really, to think that they were very good at what they did, but the dynamic, the field was changing so quickly, they just couldn't keep up. And unfortunately, taking a year to make your mind up, and then taking another 6 months to procure, you're going to end up with a car that really should be in an antiques museum, not a piece of software that's actually going to do the trick for you. So organizations are going to have to rapidly change the way they make their minds up about what they purchase. And I don't think they can do it themselves. I think they've got to engage third-party organizations who have a larger mix of skill that can be brought to bear on the particular problem the client has at that particular time.
I think that makes sense, Jeff. When I used to run a large managed security service with a global presence, we had 10 SOCs all over the world, a few hundred people running it. What was fairly obvious when you see the range of faults and attacks and things that come through, that actually running your own security is really tough, because you won't, something that we would see as a SOC, we'd see 5-10 times a year. You might only see once a year if you're running your own security, or once every 3 years. So the depth of experience covering the 24/7 coverage, the ability to sort of talk to vendors and actually get them to do something really quickly is not available to everybody. And it is complex managing your own data and your own cyber, and maybe because the world now is 24/7, it's even a heavier load.
Yeah.
Going back to Jeff's point that trying to take a decision and taking time to take a decision, that's usually because buying software is a capital expense. It's usually quite expensive, and presumably bringing in a third party would actually, a managed service, means it's spread as an operating cost, and it makes it more accessible, but also you can be more flexible, so you can move around with the relevant updates more seamlessly, presumably.
Can I actually say the software bit, the purchasing, the utilization, the getting the results from it is the easy bit. I mean, it really is the easy bit. The tough bit is the people who's have a small DPA department of 2 people saying, well, what do I do when I suddenly have all this information of listing all these problems that I have with this data everywhere, and multiple copies of it. How do I set about creating a process where we don't keep repeating this same thing every hour, every day, every month, every year? And we have lots of, prior to COVID-19, lots of organizations again saying, well, we'd rather not know about the problem because we then have to do something about it.
Oh dear.
So it's a bit sort of not particularly good way of approaching.
We did the same.
It's real.
We advise clients the same thing, because we tell them that some of the outcomes of using this software, what will happen, and you really have to make these decisions before you run it, because then you'll have to make the decisions when you do find out the results.
Yeah, absolutely, and those can take weeks, even months.
Definitely.
Of documenting, processing, making sure everyone's on the same page, and checking that the data you have out there and that's being produced in large volumes every day is not going down the same road, or that it actually is still sound. And so this is a 24/7 review of everything you're producing as an organization. It's not something you can do once a year and tick a box.
It's ongoing, isn't it?
It's ongoing completely. Yeah.
And I think the really important thing is to make sure that if you don't have them in place at the moment, or didn't have them pre the pandemic, that going into the post-pandemic phase, you need to have your policies and your processes clearly defined, and then the tools that you choose will become a much easier. It'll become a much easier process to choose them.
Absolutely.
What it is you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's definitely a two-way process. The solution is not just technology, I'm afraid. In this case, as I said, the technology is probably the easiest and the cheapest bit to do now these days. It's the human bit, which is the tough bit.
Great.
Yeah, it's the cost of ownership. Yeah.
Well, that was very helpful. And as I say, we've had discussions before about who's the most optimistic of us all. I'm hoping we'll all be back to working normally in a couple of months, but that may not be the case, and I understand that.
Well, perhaps we should open a book on it, Penny.
Preparing Thanks, Jeff. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Really helpful.
Thank you, Penny. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
We're going to turn a little bit away from software and techie stuff now, and I'm going to introduce our associate Kiki L'Italienne, who joins us today from Washington, DC. And Kiki we've been talking to Kiki a couple of times recently about how to look really professional on screen. And in fact, you were quoted, Kiki, in the New York Times, I think it was last week, on this exact subject of how to look professional. I have to tell you a funny story that's happened since the last time we spoke, and it got media coverage here in the UK this week. We have a very famous lady who does a lot of tips for people on, how to look good and how to dress, and she's run television programs and is very high profile. And yesterday she was doing a broadcast from her bathroom about how to apply your makeup, and her partner got out of the shower behind her. What's even more funny is that he is actually one of the two Saatchi brothers that established the Saatchi and Saatchi advertising agency. So he's not unfamous. But he's even more famous today, as are parts of his anatomy.
Right, infamous maybe, yes.
So hi, Kiki, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself? So tell us a little bit about how you are so good at presenting yourself on screen.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that I have a chance to talk about this because, as you know, I focus a lot on digital communications, figuring out ways where I can better connect with other people using all kinds of different tools and channels. And in the past, until very recently, I didn't share this with a lot of people. In the past, I would moonlight as a makeup artist. And so lately, some of the things that I learned related to how to show up best on video have become very helpful in combining that with the nonverbal visual cues that we give to people when we're trying to connect, along with the regular cues that we have in communications, like how we sound and how we communicate through writing. And so this is a time in history when all of those pieces are coming together. And what I found is that a lot of people are focusing on maybe the superficial part of how we show up on camera, which is important. We don't want to look sweaty. We don't want to look shiny. We don't want to look like we're in the witness protection program or anything like that. But what's more important is how are we making the people on the other side of the camera feel? How are we making people feel when we meet with them online? And I think that that is the most important part about this whole discussion and how we show up professionally on video.
Right. Because trust in who you're talking to is, of course, really important, isn't it? It's difficult perhaps to convey that when you're just talking little tiny screen to little tiny screen.
It is. One of the most important ways that we learn as human beings is by our visual cues. And it's very important that we not underplay how important that is, because this is the way we've evolved as human beings, as a human species. We were never the largest, we were never the strongest, but the way that we were able to survive and thrive was by building relationships. And we wouldn't be able to survive and thrive if we built relationships that we couldn't trust, right? Because if we built the wrong relationship, that person may just throw us in front of the tiger instead of helping us to fend it off, right? And so it's very important for us to use some of these things that we, these nonverbal cues, these ways that we are able to develop relationships through our nonverbal gestures, through the way that we dress, through the visual cues that say, I am who I say I am, so that we can build these strong relationships faster and show people that we're reliable when we don't have the opportunity like we used to be able to meet them in a sort of a neutral space, like in a meeting room or in a coffee shop or something like that. Right now we're confined in our little frames here. And so it's very important for us to be able to, demonstrate how people can trust us through our visual elements that show up. Yeah.
And of course, as we were saying earlier, this is now a window onto our own private environment. And
yes.
Carol was saying to me earlier today that we had a video conference last week with a lady in the States who's obviously also a lawyer, and what Carol was doing was looking at her books to see which books that she had on her bookshelf, which was quite interesting.
Yeah, well, and I heard someone mention earlier, making sure that the things that you have in your background are maybe not giving too many visual cues about who you are, especially if you're needing to protect the privacy of clients or protect the privacy of your, certain family members. You want to be careful that you're aware of what is behind you. But we can use these as opportunities so that people can pick up on these cues and make decisions based on what they see. Do I look super messy and disorganized if I color coordinate my books? Probably not. I might look a little OCD, but I would rather err on that side than the other. Earlier we heard from Donald, who introduced, the entire conference. And as he was speaking, he was controlling his environment behind him. He had the green screen and he had the logo behind him, which we can trust that. That's the logo. He is representing the organization. He standing up in front of everyone in person. And I thought this is a great example of someone who is doing exactly what they need to be doing, which is, this is who I am. In this capacity, I'm representing this organization, and this is the way that I present myself to you. And that is one of the most important things that we can do is, we want to make other people feel comfortable. And part of making other people feel comfortable is that you are who you say you are. You're showing up in alignment with the kind of person that you portray yourself to be. So if I, portray myself to be someone who is super organized, trustworthy, dependable, and you're trying to establish whether or not, you can invest in me or we're going to build this relationship further, if I have chaos behind me, then there's something about that. You may say, yeah, it's strange times, but there's a little bit of you that is going to say, I don't know, does this person have their life together? Can I really trust to build this relationship? And certainly we want to practice grace with others when we're in this situation where we look where others may be reporting from home, turning into meetings from home where they're not used to doing so. But listen, a lot of us are a month in on this. And so, how long can we ride on that? And by the way, video communication isn't going anywhere. We may have Zoom fatigue, but, and you can turn off your camera for one video conference call, but how long can you do that, right? We have to show up professionally. We have to put our best foot forward if we really want to build solid relationships using the tools we have available to us. So there are a few ways that we can do this. We can adjust our camera to make sure that the camera isn't looking up our noses. We've heard a lot of this, from people talking about how to look good on camera. We can be aware of our lighting. So I have a very bright window over here, but I have drapes over that, and I've set up 3-point lighting. You could use your lamps that you have at home, but situate it so that it lights up your face so people can read your expressions and have a better idea about what some of those nonverbal cues are. When we think about sound, how well are we slowing down so that people can understand us? Should we have a microphone in? If we have a problem with, a lot of us with the open layouts in modern homes, we don't have as much cushioning for sound. So it's important if you have a very echoey room that's more open, if you're, in one of those situations, that you use headphones or earbuds so that you don't have the echo that's radiating back into everyone else's ears. Visual cues that you want to be thinking about would be things like the bookshelf. What does my background look like? How am I showing up on screen? If you have a green screen, not wearing green so that you're the floating head and hands. And, yes, taking stock of what you look like before you show up online. Some of us are still chasing kids around the house that aren't usually home during the day and things like that. And of course, those things can happen, but it's worthwhile to have a mirror or something close by so that you can just take a quick look before you show up online. Look at the preview panel, look at your preferences setting in Zoom, and check to see what you look like before you jump on, so that you can put things in place. Because if you look rattled, if you look a little unkempt, I think these days people will give you a little bit of a pass, but it might create a hurdle that you don't want to have.
And of course, your attitude, and you talked about how you need your visual cues, but you and the trust, but you need to be looking into the eyes of the person that you're talking to, because that's what we would do in a normal meeting, in normal face to face.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, how are we relating? How are we connecting right now? And actually, this is a really great point to test something out. So those of you who are watching, I would be curious to hear, what is the thing that makes you feel most awkward when you join these video teleconferences? When you're jumping on Zoom, when you're going into a meeting, what is it that makes you feel most awkward? And I wrote this out so that we have our little, what makes you feel most awkward? If you can type into the chat box, I'd be very curious to see, because I think a lot of times we end up in these conversations, and there might be people who are around, and I don't know if they can type. Can they type in? Is anyone brave enough to do this?
There's a Q&A here, definitely.
Yes, Q&A. I don't know. I threw them off. I didn't warn them I was going to do it.
I'll tell you one of the things that I find, not necessarily me being awkward, but what I find irritating is if somebody is obviously, texting over here, listening
Yes.
to what we're talking about, and he's busy doing something else over here, or typing on his keypad so that I can hear the typing, David.
It's so true. And I want to say something. I'm going to speak to this, but Sean was over here saying that touching my face in today's world. Oh, yes. Very mindful of that. My face always develops an itch, and I don't want to rub my nose or my eyes. Wearing the wrong clothing for meetings. Yes. Awkward when first connecting and not knowing who else is on the call. How and when do you let people know that you're present? Yes. And then noticing that other people aren't paying attention and getting caught. It's so true. And it's so easy to do. We are surrounded by screens, and, somebody's talking and you feel like nobody's really paying attention to you right now. Maybe somebody says something that you think, oh, is that true? Let me Google that really fast. And you go over, and it can be innocent. What's my next meeting and when does it start? But instead of being around a table where you might or might not be able to, slyly check your phone or discreetly check your smartwatch, people are coming onto their screens and they're typing, right? And they're getting caught, or we're hearing it and clearly not paying attention. And you do not want to be the person that is caught doing that. So a couple of things. One, when you're present, be fully present. This is something we really need to try to do on a just day to day, even if we're not talking about video conference calls on a day-to-day basis, when we show up for something, we need to show up for something. We need to show up for the other people, and we need to be present so that we can actually, you know, take up on and recognize those opportunities as they're presented, or the ideas where we can contribute, or the learning that we need to take in. Why are we here if we're not going to actually be present, right? So we need to do that. At the very least, we need to do it so that we show respect for the other people whom are on the call. And, you know, usually that's because we want to impress or create relationships with those other people. What kind of relationship are you creating if you're caught not paying attention? It's terrible. It happened to all of us, but we really need to strive not to do that, and just show that respect.
There's another question here from Joe that's saying, are there any certain colours or types of clothes that appear better? And I think there definitely are.
Oh, yes,
Right.
yes. So, okay, so as a makeup artist, what I would do, and by the way, I was hired by the National Press Club to be one of their primary makeup artists, which I totally did this on the side, but it was fascinating. I would talk with Alan Greenspan, Bill Nye the Science Guy, all kinds of people who would come in. And the two main things that you always want to do, male, female, no matter who it is going to be on camera, is you want to cut the red and you want to reduce the shine. So cameras, video cameras, they are going to reflect out any light that they're picking up on your face. So if you tend to perspire on your upper lip, or, you know, some people right here underneath their eyes or on their foreheads, you need to be aware of that, because it can make you appear nervous. It can make you, you know, look unsettled. So you would want to either use a thin mattifier so that you can cut the shine like that, or just a powder, or just blot with a tissue before you go on camera. For colors, almost universally, some shade of blue will help you cut red out of your face. So a lot of people, as they speak, I'm one of them, it will show redness will creep up and will take over my whole being, because, you know, maybe we get warm under the lights, maybe we get nervous, and that redness comes out. But if you wear blue, then that will cut that redness. Colors that are neutral that can show up okay, like black. I wear black all the time, but I really tend to wear something like a dark navy when I'm going to be on a video call, because the dark navy translates better through the camera, and it will again offer just enough of a blue tone to cut any redness that's in your face. So some of these things you can actually use for headshots and things like that too. What do we have over here? When people are not on time for the meeting. Yes, that's frustrating too. I will also tell you that you can learn a lot by watching what your local television newscasters wear, what people wear. You'll notice lots of solid colors. You avoid patterns for more than one reason. One obvious reason is there's this moire effect, which can cause, you know, certain stripes and patterns to look like they're moving, right? Constant movement, and that's a little distracting and disturbing on camera. But another thing that happens is that it can make you appear dated very quickly. So if you're going to end up repurposing a video or something for later, it can be something that dates a picture or an image. And then on top of all of that, if you wear a pattern, it can distract from your overall conversation. People's eye will get drawn into that pattern. That's another thing about us as human beings who look at things visually, is we look for patterns. We learn from patterns. So that can actually distract from the message that you're trying to share.
I think one of the things that is unusual for us all is that we are seeing ourselves, and we don't take mirrors into meetings normally, but now that we're on screen, we do see ourselves. So you think, oh, look, that bit of hair there. Mind you, I read an article this morning actually in one of the newspapers here that said, if you thought there was a problem getting toilet paper, just wait until 26 million women all try to get a hairdressing appointment, because this is going to be a big issue coming out of this. So yes, we are very conscious of ourselves, and I've seen people in video conferences, you know, checking themselves and making sure that they look okay. And of course, that can be very distracting. So I think whatever we're doing, we have to think about, even using our hands, we have to be thinking about how distracting that might be for people in a meeting like this, in a Zoom meeting like this.
Yeah, there's a delicate dance that we have to do, because for one, one thing that we want to be aware of is that we don't want to not use our hands, because if we don't use our hands, we end up like this the whole time and it can be stilted. Another thing is, this is a really great opportunity to be very aware of your nonverbals and to work on that, because these are skills that whether we're on camera or not, it's worthwhile to improve upon, so that when we're meeting with people, we want to pay attention, we want to look into their eye, we want to be aware of not being distracted, we want to put our best foot forward, and present things in a way where people will trust us and understand. But everything from like a coffee cup that's in your picture, and this is association chat, this is a podcast that I have, and if I'm talking to someone who knows I'm affiliated with this podcast, yeah, I've got things pulled together, and those visual trust cues are going to help that connection be made. But yeah, you don't want to do this the whole time. You don't want to be distracted. Like, what am I communicating? I think it's very important to always come back to it. When in doubt, smile, take a breath, and focus more on what the other person is doing or saying, rather than worrying so much about, are they judging me? How does my hair look? Because if we put a little preparation ahead of time into our surroundings so that we can be as comfortable as possible, things could happen. Our spouse could, obviously, no matter how prepared you are, a spouse could come out of the shower and change everything. I don't know. I have a dog that right now is not in my office, usually parks herself right underneath my desk during the day, but didn't want to be interrupted. And she could be scratching at the door if my daughter releases her. I don't know. But if we practice grace, we accept what happens. If that were to happen, I would laugh about it. I would go to my door, let the dog in, and then we would proceed. And remember that, ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to better connect with people. We're trying to say, you can trust me. I am who I say I am. I want to know more about you. I want to find out how we can, move somewhere to, not move somewhere together, but achieve a common goal. And if we can do that, if we can better connect, if we can build those relationships, then we win. And so make eye contact, smile when appropriate, nod to show when you're listening, and be thinking about how you can make that other person feel like the most important person in the Zoom call. Like, Penny, you are so important to me right now.
And you to me.
Aww.
That was great. Thank you very much indeed. And I know I've certainly got to get my lighting sorted out in this room, but and that you've reminded me that of a couple of times, so I really must do that. But thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all our speakers today, Jeff, Dan, Carol, David, and I'm going to hand over now to Alessa, I think, who is going to take us on to the next session. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Penny. We really enjoyed all of those talks. They were all very interesting and some great points. And I sat here the whole time Kiki was talking and thought, what can I do differently or better? And luckily, I had my little makeup bag that I have in my purse. I did blot my nose before I came back on screen. So appreciate those tips and ideas. We thank everyone a lot. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break now as Penny's group departs, and in 10 minutes time, which it looks like it's 12:17, so we'll say 12:30, we'll come back, so 13 minutes. We'll come back with Damian Kavanagh. Thanks, everyone. Damian.
Hey there.
Thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you talk to us about all your interesting time management tips. I know I can use them. I think some comments earlier were about having the ability and or forethought to get out and about a little bit and not sit in front of Zoom and such all day long, which sadly I know I do too much of. So Can't wait to hear what you have to tell us, so take it away. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. I am really thrilled to be here today and very appreciative of the opportunity to share some things with you all that hopefully will be a little bit of fun. Hopefully we will be able to learn a little bit more about how the brain works in general, and then what types of things that you might do in this sort of this new normal now to keep you engaged a little bit. And by the way, if you're on a lot of Zoom calls or Microsoft Team calls or GoToMeeting calls these days, I highly encourage you to download like a Zoom bingo and just try and play it, because it's one of those interesting things that that while you are being fully present for your colleagues on your Zoom calls, it also is a way to have a little bit of fun in the background and to bring a little bit of joy into what can be a little bit tedious with some of these meetings. I'm Damian Kavanagh. I'm the executive director of an association that works with private schools, primarily in the southeastern part of the United States. We work with primary and secondary schools, so not higher ed, but we work with teachers, we work with administrators, we work with boards of trustees to really try and make sure that schools know what they're doing, how they're doing it, keep compliant with the various rules that are there, and really get educated in the things that are common to our association. So as an association like NAEC, we're committed to lots of professional development, lots of growth, lots of strategies to continue to grow and continue to better yourself. I do want to say that following Kiki L'Italian is not an easy task, and I did throw on this bow tie just for you, Kiki, to up my game a little bit. And in the background chat that was going on as we were transitioning and about to start this, some people told me that my video and microphone was on already. It's actually because I was using it as a little bit of a mirror quickly to make sure that I had tied it correctly. So Kiki, thank you for all of your tips about what you were talking about. Especially meaningful to me was your comment about relationships and how important they are to the work that we're really doing. So I want to move into this idea about what the brain is and what cognitive effectiveness really means. And this is about what your brain needs in order to increase your own cognitive effectiveness. And I'm going to start off with a reference to a book, and we'll make oh, Kiki, you are so funny by that little comment. I appreciate it. I'm going to start off with a book called Brain Rules. It's been around for a little over a decade now by a researcher, John Medina. There are all kinds of videos that accompany it as well. So all these things are easy to grasp onto. And I've got a little article that describes each of the 12 brain rules. So you can see them listed right here. Exercise, survival, wiring, attention, etc. I'm going to go through just a few of them pretty quickly with us. The first one is exercise, and I'm only going to refer to them. Let me see. There we go. Exercise. Exercise, plain and simple, boosts brain power. Our evolutionary ancestors walked about 12 miles a day. So if you've got a Fitbit or a device like that, and you are very proud of 10,000 steps a day, that is amazing, and it's great, especially if you can do it consistently. But 10,000 steps doesn't come anywhere close to 12 miles a day. The level of activity that's inherent in the way that our bodies were designed is something that we actually defy almost every day with a more or less sedentary lifestyle that we have. I think this is incredibly exacerbated by COVID-19, and I think that we've all heard that COVID-19 is going to give us all COVID-15 pounds that we'll all gain as a result of it. And we really have to work hard to make sure that we aren't incredibly sedentary throughout this time. But the point about this is that exercise really does boost your overall brain power. Simple things like just getting out and taking a walk, standing up every now and then, increasing your blood volume to your brains, which will absolutely increase your mental sharpness. These are some of the very basic things that happen all over the place. The next one is, and as I said, I'm skipping through some of these just to focus on a couple of them, is number 3, wiring. Every brain is wired differently. Kiki had a really great comment earlier that she said one of the things that we're doing in this environment is practicing grace. And I do think that that part of understanding why we need to practice grace with others is we simply need to understand everybody is actually different. And if you understand that and can get over the bias that we naturally have about the way that every brain is wired differently, your company and what you do in life is actually significantly more successful. A very quick example of this is hiring practices. So in most hiring practices, we tend to hire people who look a whole lot like us, or who speak like us, or act like us. We don't necessarily hire for the different point of view. Now, we give a lot of lip service to liking different points of view in our conference tables and in the conversations that we have, but we tend to hire our BFFs. And a great example of this is actually shown in some AI research from just a few years back. Amazon created an AI to do some corporate level hiring. And the AI was hiring almost exclusively males because it had a gender bias that was built into it, because the data that was fed into it had a gender bias that wasn't actually recognized. So this is one thing that we really do need to pay quite a bit of attention to. Speaking of attention, number 4 here, we don't actually pay attention to boring things. This is pretty common knowledge, and I think you probably understand this pretty well. So much so that I'm going to show you a little video.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
So thank goodness we're not fleas, and our brains actually, unlike the flea brain, does rewire itself all the time. And I'll talk a little bit about how the brain rewires itself in just a little bit. But I wanted to capture your attention with a cute little video there that you can certainly use at any moment that you would like. Here's the next brain rule that I really want to talk about, which is sleep. It is you probably know this pretty well, that sleep is an incredibly important part of how you interact with others around you, how you behave with others, how you come across, what you look like, what you feel like, what you think, and you will be better off by taking time to get the sleep that you really do need. Just a couple more before we move on to other things. This one about stress, and I'll come back to this as later on as well. The stressed brains simply don't learn the same way. And I think in this COVID-19 time, we're more stressed than we normally would be. But this is a real killer that I think we all probably know about. So I'm going to move on to something else, which is this concept of average intelligence. And this interesting thing that IQ actually changes because intelligence is actually very malleable. IQ is volatile, goes up and down until you're about 8 or 9 years old, and then it tends to peak. And then it's volatile again when you're an adolescent, and then it's highly correlated with your language ability. And a couple of interesting things, it's not correlated to adult success. So those with high IQs, low IQs, whatever it is, it's not correlated directly with adult success. And here's a little tip for you that's sort of unfortunate that you might want to know. If you're using IQ or a measure of something like that in your hiring practices, you probably should stop, because IQ actually decreases as you get older. It's actually because of the way that the test is designed, not that you are getting any less intelligent. It's really just a test bias that it has. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides here that have some different people on it. And this would be a nice time to be a little bit interactive. I won't try and do that with the chat panel, but if you want to call out answers quickly, you're welcome to do so. We'll have this opportunity and a couple more. The person on the left is really good at what they do. They're obviously a golfer, and that's just great form. It looks right. Everything is just matched up and exactly right. The person on the right is really great at what he does. He's a world-class chef. This is actually someone that some of us in Georgia happen to know. He's a world-class chef at a very large restaurant. Both of these people are extremely good at what they do, and if we measured it on a scale, we'd come up with something kind of interesting. So I'm going to show you this third image, and I think everybody probably knows who this is. This is Tiger Woods. So I think we can measure Tiger Woods' level of achievement on a little bit of a scale here, from exceptional to weak. So at golf, he is absolutely exceptional. I think we know this from all the green jackets that he has won and all of the golf tournaments that he has won over the course of his life. Now, we don't know it for sure, but I'm going to guess he's probably bad at cooking. If we were to take these two and take the average of them, we would say that he has average intelligence, which is clearly not really accurate, is it? But this is a normal way that we look at intelligence, and we actually need to be very careful with this because it really does defy what we are trying to do in our workplace when we are actually trying to identify who to move up, who to invest more professional development, how to invest in ourselves as we want to continue to get better as well. So here's the real question. Are you passionate about what you do? And is the person virtually sitting next to you? It's a pretty interesting question, and you can think through it for just a moment. Are you passionate about the work that you do? And are all of the people in your company or the vendors that you work with or the people to whom you supply services, are they passionate about what they do as well? The reason I ask this question is because that has a lot more to do with success than many other things. So now we're going to play another game very quickly. This is a who are these people? So first we'll start off with who are these people? So anybody want to jump in and answer this one? All right. I'm going to wait about 3 or 4 seconds to see if someone answers it. Hey, there we go. We got some. Stephen Hawking. Very good. Here we go. I'll throw these two up, one right after another. They're both musicians. It's okay if you don't know who these musicians are. That's fine. We got it. We got it. All right. How about this one? I think with the audience we have, this one will be pretty straightforward. There we go. We've got another one here. This is great. For all of you participating in the chat, thank you very much for doing this. It's Richard. Yeah, we got it. Richard Branson. Very good. Yep. Yep. I'll throw the next couple up here really quickly. And yeah, we're getting them. We are getting them. Very good. So here is what's really interesting that all these people have in common. First and foremost, they're all geniuses in their own right. Whether it's physical genius, comedic genius, literary, artistic genius, political genius, musical genius, theoretical astrophysics genius, I think we would all agree that they are absolutely genius. And while some, like the athlete here, may have been graced with a little bit of different physical skill than the other, everything that they do, every bit of their genius actually comes from their brain. More than any other place, it comes from their brain. So if we were to strip away everything else about them that they have achieved, what they all have in common is that they are remarkably and incredibly intelligent, and they pay a lot of attention to their brain and to establishing what helps to make their brain better. So I'm going to give you another view of intelligence here, just a couple different slides, and then we'll move into yet another activity. A better view about intelligence is the successful interaction with your environment. Making your environment something that you can control, and the ecology of your workplace is something that are intimately tied together. We saw Kiki, I'm picking on you because it was so great, and I actually took some notes. We saw that part of how Kiki delivers her presentations is from a room where her books are color-coded and organized. This is something about her workspace, or at least her delivery space, that she has control over, which is very important. You'll note, I think, that my background is actually very simple as well. I spent I know it doesn't look it, but I spent quite a bit of time designing this background so that it would be fairly nondescript as well. There is a painting above me that you can see, and in the 2 years that I've been presenting virtually through this, only one person has asked me about that painting. So if that's a game, we can leave that as a game, and I'll solve that one post event, and we can send that out in an email when you send out your crossword puzzle that people ask for as well. But there's an onus on the environment to allow you to have different interactions with it. It's you and your surround, and really what we get down to is this concept of multiple intelligences. This is something that you've probably heard of, and one of the more famous people who talks about this is Howard Gardner, and this idea of multiple intelligences, that we have different ways that we actually interact with our environment, interact with different people, and take information in and actually express information back out. Now, the reality is this graphic only shows a handful of the different intelligences that Gardner and others have identified. And the other thing is, no one is actually just one of these things. Everyone actually is made up of multiple different types of intelligences all at once. And what that means is people take information in very different ways. So let's talk a tiny bit about what the brain does. It converts photon energy, sound waves, physical vibrations, and pressure into these wonderful electrical signals. And it uses really poor material input to generate our experiences. It can fill in a lot of gaps for sensory input, and it sometimes gets things horribly, horribly wrong. Your brain rewires itself all the time, and this is called learning. It does a lot of work that we don't even know about, and it's even with some poor signals. So I'm going to show you something, and I bet you will have no problem reading it. Feel free to gasp out loud in the chat box if you'd like to. That's pretty neat, isn't it? Real studies show that transposed letters slow reading by about 12%. But the point is that your brain will interpret this really quickly, and it will. You have a friend who sends text messages like that. Yeah. Well, Siri doesn't quite get it right all the time, does she? But this study is pretty interesting because, like I said, transposing letters will slow reading down a little bit, but your brain can interpret it really, really quickly. So I'm going to show you a couple of other things that your brain plays some tricks on. Those two tabletops are actually the exact same size. Every line in these two diagrams is parallel to each other. This makes almost no sense when seen from this perspective. And when asked, most people will say that's like a ceiling or something like that. I really can't quite tell what it is. When in fact, when you invert it and make it correct, it actually, your brain interprets it very easily. Going back to bias and what the brain does, probably won't realize this, but the skin tone of both of these two people is identical. The point is, you see with your brain, not actually with your eyes. Vision is king. We use it all over the place. The brain completely deconstructs the signal and then reconstructs it with what it thinks you should be seeing. You hear with your brain, not with your ears. You feel with your brain, not with your fingers. You smell with your brain, not with your nose. So let's do a few virtual office activities very quickly. I assume everyone has been here with us all the time, and hopefully you have been doing something as you've just been sitting there. Maybe you've grasped some of these and you've done some little exercises. These are always really good. Or if you have a little squeeze ball, those are really great. Mine happens to be in the shape of a brain. I thought that was pretty fitting for this particular exercise. Here's something else. Stand up. If you've created your space in a way that you can stand up, do so. Mine actually is, and I can raise my monitor up so I can stand up, which is just wonderful. And I can show you, I actually have a wall over here which has the whiteboard paint on it. So I've been taking some notes as we have been talking today. I'm sure you can't quite read it, but I loved what Jeff Lawler said earlier. A cyber year is 4 weeks if we're lucky. And the solution isn't just technology. And some of the things that Kiki said, build relationships, practice grace, be fully present. These are some pretty easy things. And by the way, while you happen to be standing up, which I highly encourage you to do if you're not doing right, if you've been sitting all day long, go ahead and just stand up wherever you are. You're not on camera. I'm the only one on camera right now. Stand up, move around a little bit. When you're on these Zoom calls, which we are all day long, if you have an opportunity to do it while standing, do. You'll get some blood pumping, your meetings will go better, your conversations will be really great. As soon as we're done, well, even without being done with social distancing, if you're going to be taking some phone calls, get a set of headphones and walk while you take the phone call. You'll be amazed at how much better your conversation is. And then once we do get get beyond social distancing, I highly encourage you to start having meetings where you're actually taking a walk. You will really notice a marked difference in the types of meetings that you have. So where you probably have a meeting with 2, 3, 4 people or so, where you're around a table somewhere in a space together, change it to a walking meeting and see how different it feels. It's going to take you 2 or 3 times before you actually get to the point where you will understand how much difference it makes for you. But really, you should take a moment to do it. If you have a standing desk, highly encourage you to use those. These are great little things that have your desk lifted up a little bit. And generally, the way people use them is in the morning they're standing, and gradually they are lowering it throughout the day, so that they're seated at the end of the day. But then they get out to get some more exercise. And then this other good tip here: set a timer throughout the day, or block out times on your calendar to make sure that you take some breaks. I'm telling you, it's really important to do that. Another thing, if you work from home quite a bit, is get one of these guys. That is, let me move this chair out of the way. This is that's a bicycle. It's called a Fit Desk. It's got a little place to sit your computer on so that you can listen to webinars. I have, especially in COVID-19, there are a lot of webinars all the time. And so I've ridden quite a lot of miles this time during some of these webinars. But even outside of that, just some very quick mental breaks so that you stop what you're doing, go do something else for 3, 4, 5 minutes or so. You will be much better off for doing that. So a couple things: had we been able to do this live, it would have been great. We would have actually gone on a walk, and I would have done one other thing. I'll just do this very quickly for you. I would have taught everybody how to juggle. This is yet another little thing. You don't have to have a lot of dexterity. Even if you don't juggle, that's fine. Just grab one of your squeezy balls and just toss it back and forth a little bit. That will help you quite a bit in what you are trying to do. Really, it takes your mind off things, and it is not a bad thing to do. So since I'm performing really quickly, I'll do this very quickly. All right, just to prove that I can, because people don't normally believe it, but they can. So I'm going to return now to the presentation and back to this idea of movement and cognition. That thing we call thinking is the evolutionary internalization of movement. Our brain evolved to use our body to think with. The whole point of this is to say exercise and movement is key with continuing your brain's development and moving you forward into better and deeper and longer conversations. Here's some common language as a spatial metaphor. I see your point. I look up to you. He stooped to her level. When I get around to it, I felt a load lift when he said that. Our views are too far apart. I feel warmly toward her. And our language is just metaphorical, far beyond what we typically consider. So I'm going to give you some feedback loops here that will also blow you away. When you hold a warm cup of coffee, it makes you act more warmly towards others. Striking a power pose prompts people to make better decisions. Being thirsty makes a bottle look closer. Carrying a backpack makes hills look steeper. Moving an object up speeds recall for positive events. Sitting on a hard chair will make you a tougher negotiator. Forcing a smiling facial expression will make a cartoon funnier. Holding a pencil between your teeth makes you think things are funnier also. And thinking about the past or future makes most people gently sway backward or forward. So here's the thing. The brain grows new neurons all the time. The way in which it does it is through exercise. Let me put it to you this way. You probably went to college and you might have killed a few brain cells at some point, and you might have thought, well, those are gone for good. Well, the truth is they're actually not. You can always regrow. The connections between your brain cells, which is called this idea of neuroplasticity. But in reality, boredom is plain and simple the brain's enemy. So we talked about some of the environmental factors that are around you, and I'll just throw these out here. Probably I don't need to read them all, but managing stress and having social support, especially in this distanced time, continues to be even more significant for us and more important in everything that we are trying to do. So I'm going to skip to this slide that's really about stress and managing your mental state here. Stress is simply one of the worst things that takes a toll on our body and on our brain. So a couple of quick things here that are fairly straightforward and fairly easy. Talk, write down some feelings, laugh, dance, practice forgiveness. I may change that out in the future to practice grace, a la Kiki l'Italian. That's just a great phrase. Put your devices down. I think we heard one of the earlier speakers, actually, and it's not as if you don't realize this, we are not just in a connected world because we're in a connected world, but now we're in this hyper-connected world. Now that everyone is operating more or less virtually and in this virtual environment with these new tools, these new systems, Microsoft Teams, Slack, GoToMeeting, Zoom, various different platforms, we are now over-connecting with each other, I would think. And there's a good opportunity to go ahead and push pause on that sometimes, even if it's just 10 or 20 minutes every hour, every 2 hours, every 3 hours or so. It's really important to go ahead and do that. Put them down, just take a break from it. Try something new. Try to, during these times, learn a language. I mean, you can look on Facebook or on Twitter about all the things that people are trying to do and learn to do during this time that we are in. Lots of great cooking recipes that are all over the place. Lots of great skills that people are engaging in. And I'll ask if anybody's got some new things that they're trying that you want to throw in the chat box to share with others. That'd be a great thing to do. Coloring book. Believe it or not, there's a great mental relief that comes from doing coloring books. Like I'm talking about like children's coloring books, or you can get anything with an outline in it. Believe it or not, the smell of a Crayola crayon will lower your blood pressure, presumably because it brings back memories of a peaceful time and a calmer time. I'll teach everybody how to juggle, Kiki. So I'm happy to do that. Cheddar bacon muffins. Okay, we need that recipe. I'm just going to throw that out there. But certainly walk, exercise, sleep. Absolutely key elements. And drink more water than you normally think that you should. So here's this thing about the brain, and I just want to point a couple different parts about the brain. Frontal lobe's responsible for reasoned thinking, ethics, understanding consequence of action, realizing what's the difference between right and wrong. The cortex has sensory areas, motor areas, and association areas. Again, being very basic, the cortices are responsible for what we feel and the reactions to what we feel. Part of the limbic system, the amygdala, is responsible for emotional learning and social cognition, sort of like figuring out what to do with memories or emotional experiences, or to put it another way, it's the referee between what's felt in the cortex and what is thought in the frontal lobe. So this is the part of the brain that is most responsible for motor, sensory, visual cortex, the auditory processing, and then executive function is always up at the front. I'll give you another little thing, just a couple of different points here. The hippocampus and the amygdala. The amygdala is this little thing that is, you can see where it's located, and it actually swells through adolescence. And it will revert to normal size somewhere a little bit later in life. So if you are working with if you got your own kids who are teenagers, or you're working with young adults in their 20s or late 20s or so, there's still something physiologically going on. I got a little audio recording to help describe it for us.
Here's the thing about teenagers. Their cerebral frontal cortex is not fully formed till they're 25.
I've heard that.
So you have to assume that they're mentally impaired, that you're dealing with mentally ill people, and that's why they make really bad decisions, and they're susceptible to peer pressure, and they think they know everything. So it's as though until they're 25, you're living in an insane asylum. I'm not saying that glibly.
25, you said? Really?
Yeah, 24. Well, maybe for men it's 32.
It could be.
Oh, there we go. That's a little bit of humor there. We always enjoy that one. There's this concept of plasticity. I mentioned it just a little bit ago. Literally, the brain rewires itself all the time. Your intelligence is not fixed, and knowledge of the expanding nature of intelligence does more to boost math grades, for example, than how to study math. Let me share that out with you, and then we'll talk briefly about what it means in the workplace. So a great little Ed science test that was run on two sets of students. They took a test, and then they do what's called an intervention in between. Then they do a retest to see what the effect of the intervention is. It's the basic way that research works anywhere. In one case, the intervention was reteaching the material. In the other case, the intervention was teaching the students about what happens as they learn. And so interestingly, over time, the group that was taught more about how they learn and how they process information wound up doing a little bit better on the retests than the group that was simply retaught the material. It's a little bit interesting, and I think it's got some pretty neat ramifications for us in the workplace, where we might give a set of instructions to employees, or we may be responsible for pushing information out from a learning perspective, or we may be even taking information in and not fully understanding it the way that we need to, so that we can apply it. Well, a little bit of focus on how the brain actually works and how memory works can actually go a really long way to help you with your own learning and your own continued growth in your own learning, but also those of your employees and your children as well, and anybody else who you may come into contact with. I'm going to throw a couple of different ideas out at you from the education sphere. The first one is is called the Zone of Proximal Development by this guy named Vygotsky. So ZPD is pretty simply, there's something that you can learn with a little bit of pre-knowledge that you might not be able to learn otherwise. And I'll show you a simpler way of this that's actually got something that's pretty straightforward. A learner can do something with a little bit of guidance if they've got some pre-knowledge about it, but a learner can't do something as well if they've got no interaction to it whatsoever. So a different way of thinking about this is if you have a little bit of information, then you can go much deeper into a field than if you start with the great corpus of information with no real context to what you're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to wrap up pretty quickly here with a few takeaways. First one, the brain simply rewires itself all the time. Second, you can see here, your intelligence is not fixed. It is, in fact, malleable. Exercise is a brain rule that flat out works. Sleep is mandatory for all kinds of great brain function. Find your strengths, be good at them, decrease your stressors as much as you can, and be aware of how your brain works. You can get a lot more out of that 3 pounds of goo. Yeah, by the way, the brain's about 3 pounds. It's about the consistency of toothpaste, and there's actually enough electrical current running through it literally to light up a light bulb. I'm happy to try to address any questions that might pop up, or I can address them later. But I wanted to get through that. I know that you all have been in this webinar for quite some time now, and I'm greatly appreciative to have the time to present a couple of tips, a little bit about how the brain works for this wonderful, wonderful group. And I'll throw it back over to you.
Hi, everyone. This is Elisa. Please throw questions at Damian for a few minutes if you have any, and I'll give him a little time for us to watch what's going on in the chat box or the Q&A box. We're watching both. Well, Damian, it sort of looks like you answered our questions as we went along. I thought that was fascinating, and now that I've been told I answered too many questions, I'm going to challenge everyone on this call to fill out an NAEC crossword puzzle that I'm going to share with anyone who wants it. So thank you so much, Damian and the rest of the gang, for being on today. I know we're wrapping a little earlier, as Damian said, but I think we all got a lot out of it and gives us a little time to get on with our day. So thanks everyone so much, and I look forward to hearing from y'all about what you thought about our presentation today. Take care and have a good one. Stay safe.